Good evening, everyone. I have here a good friend of mine. His name is Raz. Raz, will you please introduce yourself?
So hello and good evening to everyone and to the classmates of Alan and his instructor. So my name is Raz and I'm a second year law student at the University of the Cordilleras.
I remembered you went overseas. Is it okay if I ask some questions about them?
It's okay.
My first question would be, what country have you visited?
So I only have visited two countries.
Those are,
That being New Hampshire, Amherst, and Hong Kong.
how long have you stayed there on both countries, in both countries?
At first, we went to New Hampshire when I was seven years old. I stayed with my aunt for 2 years, then moved back here to the Philippines. That was just for like vacation. So I tried to go to school there, but they wouldn't credit me since they wouldn't credit my past
Grades.
no 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 no. They wouldn't credit my past achievements back in school. Then
Mm.
moved here back at 9. And yeah, that was pretty much it. Stayed here in the Philippines up until now. Just visited Hong Kong in 2019 for a Christmas visit with my mother.
So 2 years, Hampshire, and a visit
Hmm?
to Hong Kong.
Yes.
When you first arrived in those countries, have you had any culture shock experiences?
I can't remember back in Amherst, but in Hong Kong there was a slight culture shock for me. Well, it wasn't like a complete culture shock, but I think it's because of the language barrier of the people over there and well, people everywhere who whose countrymen aren't that used to speaking in English. So yeah, that was like a culture shock for me, specifically the language barrier because it's so hard to communicate. You don't know the place, you're just new there, you don't have a tour guide. So yeah, maybe it was the language barrier at best.
So language barrier was the culture shock experience you've had.
Mhm.
Uh, let's talk about Hong Kong. What makes that country's culture so different from our culture as a Filipino?
So specific as technically speaking, we're all Asian. So albeit removing food, removing some aspects that we have since we're all Asian, we're bound to be similar in most characteristics or most personalities. But first thing I noticed was first thing first thing I noticed was the economy. The
Economy. Okay.
economy is a great difference here in the Philippines compared to Hong Kong. I'm gonna give an example. So one example I really noticed and experienced firsthand, I think was the telecommunications there
Mhm.
in Hong Kong. It's way better here than in the Philippines. So yeah, I think of course Philippines is a third world country while Hong Kong is considered as a first world, but they're not yet labeled as a
First.
first world country yet. But still, everything there is like um let's say an upgrade compared to the Philippines.
Yes.
So yeah, economical status is one of the biggest difference I noticed compared to the Philippines
Okay.
in Hong Kong.
So that was economical, right?
Mm.
Any advice you can give to Filipinos who wants to travel, work, or immigrate in that country? So let's have Hong Kong again. You
Mhm.
were young when you went to Hampshire, so let's talk about Hong Kong. Any advice you can give them or you want to tell them?
Well, as we can see now, OFWs are scattered around the world. I think it's before the pandemic, it wasn't even hard to go to this is practically speaking, it isn't even hard to go to other countries
Mm,
compared to now. During the pandemic, of course, that's a given fact. So um, there are a lot of OFWs there in Hong Kong,
mhm.
specifically specifically in Mongkok, in the Mongkok district, there are a lot of Filipinos there. They're like waiting. They're like working inside restaurants as chefs. So
Mm-hmm.
I one thing I learned is that they don't usually discriminate Filipinos in Hong Kong compared to other countries. So in Hong Kong, they treat Filipinos just the same as they treat
Uh-huh.
Chinese people there. So I think one advice I could give to people who want to work in Hong Kong is don't be scared, because the only thing you're going to be scared of over there is the language. Of course, you need to learn the language to better work there, to better enjoy the experience there in Hong Kong, whether
Mm-hmm.
you're working or you're going for a visit or for a vacation. So it isn't a problem. Most cultured cities like Saigon, if I pronounce that correctly, sorry.
Okay lang.
Um, Saigon has a lot of Chinese people who understand English, and then in Hong Kong also, most employers are English people. I don't know. I don't know why, but most employers there are English people. So the typical katulong, babysitter type of jobs in Hong Kong. You don't hear much abuse news or abuse reports from Hong Kong or English people towards Filipinos. But yeah, I think the biggest challenge for aspiring Filipinos to work over there in Hong Kong is the language. Number one
Language.
is language.
Language
So
number.
I think the culture is pretty much the same here in the Philippines. So yeah, people work at 8, go home at 9. I mean 5 in the afternoon. So yeah, the time isn't different. It's the same. So us, China, and then Hong Kong are have the same time.
Mm.
So yeah, that's the only thing I could advise to excuse me, people who want to work over there in Hong Kong.
Thank you for that wonderful advice, and thank you for your time and having this
Thank you
interview
too.
with me. Good morning, and that would be all.